Okay, so the last time that we were in Narnia, the lion, Aslan, no, he was being surrounded by all of the witches' supporters, minions. That works. So I'm just going to start back a little bit. So the witch kind of thought he wasn't going to show up. But then she was like, ha, he came, bind him. And if she said bind him, what does that mean?
Tie him up to pool.
Tie him up.
Wait, really?
Yep.
Oh, I thought he was guessing.
Lucy and Susan held their breaths, waiting for Aslan's roar and his spring upon his enemies, but it never came. 4 hags, grinning and leering, yet also at first hanging back and half afraid of what they had to do, had approached him. Bind him, I say, repeated the White Witch. The hags made a dart at him and shrieked with triumph when they found that he made no resistance at all. The others, evil dwarfs and apes, rushed in to help them, and between them they rolled the huge lion over on his back and tied all his 4 paws together, shouting and cheering as if they had done something brave, though had the lion chosen, one of those paws could have been the death of them all. Do you remember reading that last time? We talked about how that sounds parallel to the death of Jesus. But he made no noise, even when the enemies, straining and tugging, pulled the cord so tight that they cut into his flesh. Then they began to drag him toward the stone table. Stop, said the witch. Let him first be shaved. Another roar of mean laughter went up from her followers as an ogre with a pair of shears came forward and squatted down by Aslan's head. Snip, snip, snip went the sneers, and masses of curling gold mane began to fall to the ground. Then the ogre stood back, and the children, watching from their hiding place, could see the face of Aslan, looking all small and different without its mane. The enemies also saw the difference. Why, he's only a gray cat after all, cried one. Is that what we were afraid of? Said another. And they surged round Aslan, jeering at him, saying things like, here, kitty, 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 poor kitty. And how many mice have you caught today, cat? And would you like a saucer of mouse, kittens? Oh, how can they? Said Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. The brutes, the absolute brutes. For now that the first shock was over and the shorn face of Aslan looked to her braver and more beautiful and more patient than ever. Muzzle him, said the witch, and even now as they worked with his face putting on the muzzle, one bite from his jaw would have cost 2 or 3 of them their hands, but he never moved, and this seemed to enrage all that rabble. Everyone was at him now. Those who had been afraid to come near him even after he was bound began to find their courage, and for a few minutes the 2 girls could not even see him, so thickly was he surrounded by the whole crowd of creatures, kicking him, hitting him, spitting on him, jeering at him. At last, the rabble had had enough of this. They began to drag at the bound and muzzled lion to the stone table, some pulling and some pushing. He was so huge that even when they got him there, it took all their efforts to hoist him onto the surface of it. Then there was more tying and tightening of cords. The cowards, sobbed Susan. Are they still afraid of him, even now? When once Aslan had been tied, and tied so that he was really a mass of cords, and on the flat stone a hush fell on the crowd. 4 hags holding 4 torches stood at the corners of the table. The witch bared her arms as she had bared them the previous night when it had been Edmund instead of Aslan. Then she began to whet her knife. It looked to the children, when the gleam of the torchlight fell on it, as if the knife were made of stone, not of steel, and it was of strange and evil shape. At last she drew near. She stood by Aslan's head. Her face was working and twitching with passion, but his looked up at the sky, still quiet, neither angry nor afraid, but a little sad. Then just before she gave the blow, she stooped down and said in a quivering voice, and now, who has won? Fool, did you think that by all this you could save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? And who will take him out of my hand then? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever, and you have lost your own life, and you will not have saved him. In that knowledge, despair and die. So she's going back on her word, isn't she? The children did not see the actual moment of the killing. They couldn't bear to look and had covered their eyes. Deeper magic from before the dawn of time. While the two girls still crouched in the bushes with their hands over their faces, they heard the voice of the witch calling out, "Now follow me all, and we will set about what remains of this war. It will not take us long to crush the human vermin and their traitors now that the great fool, the great cat, lies dead." At this moment, the children were for a few seconds in very great danger. For with wild cries and a noise of skirling pipes and shrill horns blowing, the whole of that vile rabble came sweeping off the hilltop and down the slope, right past their hiding place. They felt the specters go by them like a cold wind, and they felt the ground shake beneath them under the galloping fleet of the minotaurs. And overhead there went a flurry of foul wings and the blackness of vultures and giant bats. At any other time, they would have trembled with fear, but now the sadness and shame and horror of Aslan's death so filled their minds that they hardly thought of it at all. As soon as the wood was silent again, Susan and Lucy crept out onto the open hilltop. The moon was getting low and thin clouds were passing across her, but still they could see the shape of the lion lying dead in his bonds. And down they both knelt in the wet grass and kissed his cold face and stroked his beautiful fur, what was left of it, and cried till they could cry no more. And then they looked at each other and held each other's hands for mere loneliness and cried again. And then again were silent. At last, Lucy said, "I can't bear to look at that horrible muzzle. I wonder, could we take it off?" So they tried. And after a lot of working at it, for their fingers were cold and it was now the darkest part of the night, they succeeded. And when they saw his face without it, they burst out crying again and kissed it and fondled it and wiped away the blood and the foam as well as they could. And it was all more lonely and hopeless and horrid than I know how to describe. "I wonder, could we untie him as well?" said Susan presently. But the enemies, out of pure spitefulness, had drawn the cord so tight that the girls could make nothing of the knots. I hope no one who reads this book has been quite as miserable as Susan and Lucy were at that night. But if you've been up all night and cried till you have no more tears left in you, you will know that there comes in the end a sort of quiet. You feel as if nothing was ever going to happen again. At any rate, that was how it felt to those two. Hours and hours seemed to go by in the dead calm, and they hardly noticed that they were getting colder and colder. But at last, Lucy noticed two other things. One was that the sky on the east side of the hill was a little less dark than it had been an hour ago. The other was some tiny movement going on in the grass at her feet. At first, she took no interest in this. What did it matter? Nothing mattered now. But at last, she saw that whatever it was had begun to move the upright stones of the stone table. And now, whatever they were moving about on Aslan's body. She peered closer. They were little gray things. "Ugh!" said Susan from the other side of the table. "How beastly! There are horrid little mice crawling over him. Go away, you little beasts!" And she raised her hand to frighten them away. "Wait!" said Lucy, who had been looking at them more closely still. "Can you see what they're doing?" Both girls bent down and stared. "I do believe," said Susan. "But how weird. They're nibbling away at the cords." "That's what I thought," said Lucy. "I think they're friendly mice. Poor little things. They don't realize he's dead. They think it'll do some good untying him." It was quite definitely lighter by now. Each of the girls noticed for the first time the white face of the other. They could see the mice nibbling away, dozens and dozens, even hundreds of little field mice, and at last, one by one, the ropes were all gnawed through. The sky in the east was whitish by now, and the stars were getting fainter, all except one very big one low down on the eastern horizon. They felt colder than they had been all night. The mice crept away again. The girls cleared away the remains of the gnawed ropes. Aslan looked more like himself without them. Every moment his dead face looked nobler, as the light grew and as they could see it better. In the wood behind them a bird gave a chuckling chuckling sound. It had been so still for hours and hours that it startled them. Then another bird answered it. Soon there were birds singing all over the place. It was quite definitely early morning now, not late night. "I'm so cold," said Lucy. "So am I," said Susan. "Let's walk about a bit." They walked to the eastern edge of the hill and looked down. The one big star had almost disappeared. The country all looked dark gray, but beyond, at the very end of the world, the sea shone pale. The sky began to turn red. They walked to and fro more times than they could count between the death of Aslan and the eastern ridge, trying to keep warm, and oh, how tired their legs felt. Then at last, they stood for a moment, looking out toward the sea and Cair Paravel, which they could now just make out. The red turned to gold along the line where the sea and the sky met, and very slowly up came the edge of the sun. At that moment, they heard from behind them a loud noise, a great cracking, deafening noise, as if a giant had broken a giant's plate. "What's that?" asked Lucy, clutching Susan's arm. I feel afraid to turn around," said Susan. "Something awful is happening. They're doing something worse. To him," said Lucy. "Come on." And she turned, pulling Susan round with her. The rising of the sun had made everything look so different. All colors and shadows were changed that for a moment they didn't see the important thing. Then they did. The stone table was broken into two pieces by a great crack that ran down it from end to end, and there was no Aslan. Oh, cried the two girls, rushing back to the table. "Oh, it's too bad," sobbed Lucy. "They might have left the body alone." "Who's done it?" cried Susan. "What does it mean? Is it more magic?" "Yes," said a great voice behind their backs. "It is more magic." They looked around. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, for it had apparently grown again, stood Aslan himself.